So my next speakers are Newdigate and Helen Marzolf. We are gathering in front of Anne's work here in an exhibition. Anne Newdigate has a degree in African Studies and English Literature from the University of Cape Town and a BFA and MFA from the University of Saskatchewan. She completed a postgraduate year in the Tapestry Department of the Edinburgh College of Art. Her work has been exhibited internationally. She represented Canada in the Lotz Tapestry Biennial in Poland and has taught, been on conference panels, and given lectures internationally from Tasmania to New York. Born in Grahamstown, South Africa, Anne Newdigate came to Canada in 1966 and now lives and works on Hornby Island, British Columbia.
Thanks.
Helen Marzolf is a practicing artist who has taught early 20th century studies in art and architecture at the University of Saskatchewan. She is a former assistant curator at the
Kenderdine
Art Gallery, U of Saskatchewan, from 1991 till 2001, and was director-curator of the Dunlap Art Gallery at Regina Public Library. She moved to Victoria in 2005, where she was executive director of Open Space until 2017.
It's really unusual to be talking to you, not sitting on your gray sofa with Reggie nearby and his friend.
Reginald the cat.
Reginald, pardon me. I thought it was also okay to call him Reggie, but because he's so naughty. Anyway, I was just saying before, maybe not all of you could hear, that this is a wonderful context to see your work. And I hadn't seen these works for, I think, a couple of decades. And it's like seeing them just all over again. They're just still so potent and exciting to see. So Anne and I have been friends for, I don't know, 35 years or something, maybe 40. Would have been the shoestring days in the 70s. And I've always been astonished by her work. And I thought, I want to read a title of one of her articles, because not only is she an artist and a historian, she's also a writer and many other things. So it kind of summarizes some of the things about her work. The work was published in New Feminist Art Criticism, edited by Kathy Deepwell. And Anne's title was Kinda Art, Sorta Tapestry. Tapestry is shorthand access to the definitions, languages, institutions, attitudes, hierarchies, ideologies, constructions, classifications, histories, prejudices, and other bad habits of the West. So she's got this great, playful, comedic, and subversive side, too. So I think to start with, maybe not everybody here is knows about Gobelin tapestry, so I thought it would be great if you could just tell us a bit, Anne, about how you moved into Gobelin tapestry, which is it's very exacting form, and it's associated with like dominant histories and power.
Sure. Well, it started in Saskatchewan. I had tiny kids. There's one of the big ones here now. And I wanted to get away from them. So I went to Fort Capel, where there was a summer school, and I was just going to study anything that I decided to do, learn about Navajo tapestries. And that was the start of, like Janet talked about, one of those turning moments. And I became friendly with a person called Kate Waterhouse, who was 80, and she was living in Craik in Saskatchewan. And she dyed plants, she collected plants. Her place was full of dyes that she experimented with. And Craik is a tiny place, halfway between Regina and Saskatoon. And when she passed away, she bequeathed all these bags and bags and bags of fleece that she had dyed. She bequeathed it to me. So that was quite a gift, and I was very honored. And so what happened was that I made contact with Prince Albert's Community College, and they got the Weavers Guild to process these dirty fleece, but they were dyed with things like umbilicaria, which is what I learned about too, which is a lichen and sage and onion skin and rhubarb root. And then we had a design workshop. I went up 80 miles from Saskatoon to Prince Albert, and we did a communal design and then put a warp on. So that's when I can tell you about technical things. All these are done, this is done on a loom, and a loom is crucial to actual weaving. It's a very rigid bar on another rigid bar, and you put a very strong warp over and on this, and then you get that ready, and then you come with a weft, and you come in and out and in and out. And so this was done by a group, and it was an image of, I used an image of, well, jointly, everybody brought something to contribute to the design. And the image was of Kate, who was a farmer, and her husband was blind, and she read books to him every day, and then when he died, she went to the college in Regina and said, I want to study mathematics. And they said, well, why do you want to study mathematics? You're 80. And she said, because I didn't pass it at high school. So they said to her, why don't you do something that's nicer and more fun, and take up weaving? So she wove, and she dyed the stuff. She wrote a little book which I got involved with on the dyes of Saskatchewan. So the images, there was another very key figure, somebody called Margaret van Walsum, who had come from Holland. And because of her childhood in Holland, they thought there could be no more war, but they came to Canada, and Margaret was also an expert in Navajo weaving. So the image was of the two of them sitting, working on their yarn, and it has all the names of the people who wove it around it. So that got me going, but then I found that my more academic side had to somehow incorporate this basic thing with weaving and dyeing, and a happy thing would be to go and find a fleece that was a Jacob fleece instead of a Lincoln, and you'd work with that. And then I got into my BFA, and Eli Bornstein, one of the instructors, said, well, what have you lot been doing over the summer? So I said, well, actually, I've been weaving. So he said, well, that's okay with me, so. But it was always a battle. It was a department that was very much formalist, and I'm grateful for that, because it has been very helpful. And then I learned here and I learned there, and I went to Edinburgh, and I was accepted for a year to study there. And I went to France, I went all over, I read books, I got magazines, and then eventually found that I was unable to control these natural dyes, and they were controlling me. And so at Edinburgh, they forced one to not make a tapestry unless you could absolutely justify it. So people were making other kinds of things that were called tapestry, because it was experimenting and so on, which was very, very healthy. And so then I learned to interpret my drawings, and I work with drawings and my drawings. And there is a custom in the tapestry world that the images come from a very well-known painter,
Right.
wherever it is. And the weavers would be like at the Dovecot studio in Edinburgh, they would interpret the drawings. I think I've gone there.
But you've also said that all of your activity, whether you're working on a Gobelin tapestry or you're drawing or doing a watercolor, it's all drawing to you. So it seems to me that you're making this historical form work in a more contemporary way, particularly because of the way you think about it.
I think so, and I think that I think drawing is something that many people become artists even if they don't continue to draw, but often it seems to be based on an ability to draw. So that is very much in my childhood. And so I think like a drawer when I'm making a tapestry. Yeah. Did you want to look at the back? Somebody asked me if they minded looking at the back.
Yeah. Well, you also say at some point, in some of the things you've written, that you learned the Gobelin style tapestry from behind, from the back.
Yes, I did do a bit of an apprenticeship in the south of France with somebody called Michel Mesnage, and she had been in India, but Gobelin actually has a 7-year apprenticeship, and you do not vary your methodology, not a scrap. There was sort of a war at one stage between Gobelin and I think Aubusson, which is low relief. It's woven on actually from the back flat. So, and the Gobelin is woven upright from the back also. And the war was because somebody stole the recipe for a dye, a particular dye. So they're very strict. And I visited the Gobelin in Paris to see how it works, and it was about a loom about as wide as this whole room, and there were perhaps 4 or 5 people working on it, and they were interpreting. So experimentation would come from the imagery, not from the process.
Right.
So when sometimes I was in an exhibition of somebody, in Aubusson, yes, I remember seeing the wife of a very famous person whose name is just escaping me. Somebody will know, I know. Anyway, she was looking at it, and I could just see from the body language that this was not, sort of tapestry, because that was an exhibition that was there.
So one of the things that you do in your tapestries, and particularly the Sentences series, is that you use these anecdotes that you find in newspapers, but I think you have other sources too, and they're often kind of barbed, and you wouldn't expect to encounter them in this format. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the marginalized event or reportage and what draws you to that minutia, especially with respect to history, where this particular form is so located in a history of power.
Well, I think that nothing is very simple in life. I was thinking Pierre had said something about while objecting to evil, I'm not getting the words right, you also condone, and this is I'm very concerned about how, as I say, nothing is simple, but there's ambivalence in many situations. Right. And I think sometimes humor is one of the elements that makes for the work to be bizarre, because life is so bizarre,
Yeah, you can't invent it, really.
Right. So words, I should say that as a child I talked too much, and I was called gramophone, if anybody knows what a gramophone is anymore. But I am very interested in stories and the verbal things and differences of language and so on.
So this particular one, I've got the title here, Sentences, Fanacalo and the Vanishing Signs, involves this kind of industrial language. And in another series of your work, you dealt with another industrial language. I think you could call Pittman shorthand a form of industrial or kind of instrumentalized language that strips out any of the nuance or ambivalence. So what was it about that really drew you to this?
Well, the first one of these is a series of 8, and the first one I should begin by saying that I was born in South Africa, that my forebearers came there in 1820, and I was born in the place where they arrived, and there was, they were told by the British government that there was this lovely free land, and it would be theirs if they just came out. Well, of course, it wasn't free. And in that town of Grahamstown, where I went to school, there was a little item in one of the newspapers that talked about the fact that a policeman was acquitted for shooting a man dead for singing at a funeral, because singing in their own languages causes riots, so he was justified in shooting us. And then there were many things that offended me, but that seemed to just strike because it was where I was born and all that. So that was the first one. And then I have, these are the last two, and this is the last one after the end of apartheid, when I didn't do any more of the sentences.
And then this one was earlier, and it's based on another kind of storytelling that was in a completely different form than what the maker would have expected. So
it was my intention to take the ephemeral that was in newspapers with these items about the lives of ordinary people in the apartheid system, and so this one was about somebody called Lindy Wilson, who did a film about the political prisoners on Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was. And the prisoners were working in a quarry when a warder was somewhere where he perhaps should not have been, and he had his children, and it was the first time in years that the prisoners heard a child's voice. I just found that so terrible. Let's go to somebody else.
Okay. I think I've always sort of harbored this idea that art can create the kind of conversation, even if you're in complete disagreement with the person that you're talking to, that there's this space, this kind of space of dialogue. And it seems to me that we're living in a time where everything is so bifurcated and polarized. It's really hard to, have those hard conversations in a meaningful way. And I know that, these works are now, a few decades old, and when you see them again and you think about what their power is, like this comfortable, warm wool and silk object that has this dark text in it, what kind of, how do you see it mobilizing the people who read it or view it, and what kind of difference have you seen in
I'm very aware that an art object is observed in different ways by different people. So that's not the motive for me. It's something I've had to learn to accept.
Yeah.
The beauty of tapestry. I mean, I always try to annoy my professors at the U of S by saying that paintings try hard to be like a tapestry.
Yeah.
So, just to be obnoxious, but
I think you'd have a lot of fun with that.
yeah.
Actually.
But by using tapestry, to take the ephemeral newspaper and make it something that these will last for like hundreds of years, right, if they're properly treated. I mean, many of the old tapestries were not properly treated in France, and they developed holes and moths and all kinds of things. But I think one of the things was advertising around the South African situation, which was people would say, "Oh, it's so beautiful," and not see the other side of it, which was beneath that beauty. And so that is a sort of challenge to people to not make the reading too easy. So,
right.
Because it's not the information that was available was not easily available. And in fact, You know, when Nelson Mandela went into jail for 27 years, he went in as a young man, and he was a boxer and a lawyer, and he was there for 27 years, and nobody could see an image of him. Nobody knew what he'd looked like when he came out. And he was a grey-haired old man, and he was benign. He was no longer a boxer. And when he was asked, was there anything that he had not achieved in life, he said, yes, I wanted to be a world-class boxer. So
maybe on another level he was, in a way.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question, but was it about perception?
Yeah,
reception?
but I think that you did kind of answer it, because it's, you know, it's not the artist's job to determine how people enter the work or what they, you know, how they interpret it. I often, you know, when I look at these, I know that there's like millions of gestures, and there's a lot of labor in creating them, and it's a slow process. And for the last couple of years, I've been reading a book, because I think I'm naturally slow, called Slow Philosophy, and it advocates thinking about reading, particularly in the academic setting, as, you know, how difficult it is for people in academia to be able to read and read slowly, to crack ideas open or to think about things, rather than looking for evidence or trying to make a case or come to a conclusion or prove something. And I wondered, you know, when I look at these, I can't help but think of that every time I see them, how long the process is. And I wondered if, like a writer who thinks through writing, through their craft, if there's a thinking that happens when you make these make these works over a period of time.
In some ways, I think that sitting at a loom, it's ritualistic, and you have to go and sit at the loom, and it's very quiet and it's very slow, and there's, I think, a great joy in that, and a great joy in the people that also work, not necessarily in tapestry, but generally. I think there are many pleasures that come, but I think there's also been an element when I started doing this, sentences series of penance.
Penance?
Penance, yes.
Oh.
And I sit at the loom, and I am very quiet, and I don't talk to anybody, and because nobody's, you know, going to come and talk to me, sort of thing. I thought I could learn French at the same time as doing the tapestry.
So it's
Didn't work.
Oh, different than what I expected. So there's also this element of foraging for materials, and you know how things come to you, that you've talked about with Kate Waterhouse from Craig, Saskatchewan.
Right.
And you also, there's another time when you were in a room full of silk that was up to your waist. And you were able to sort of forage things. Yes. And I wondered if you could talk about the idea of foraging.
I've collected the materials. That's one of the problems with tapestry making, is that unless you're in an institution like the Gobelin, or like the one in Melbourne, that the Victoria Tapestry Workshop, which is where the rainbow colours come from. They have this fabulous range of colours in different weights and things. So the linen comes from Kirkcaldy in Scotland. There was a linen mill closing down, and it had to close down because the post office used to use linen bags for the mailmen to go around. Mailmen showing up again in the stories. And they switched to nylon, and the whole tapestry, the whole yarn making, cloth making thing we just had to win. And so the students at the Edinburgh College of Art, we went out. I've spent a year there, and we went out to Kirkcaldy, and again we were going from floor to floor, and the stuff all cost 50 cents a pound, I think. And so people were sort of saying, I'll have some of those and some of and there was some, amongst the things displayed there were the gowns for the so-called madhouse, and they were made of linen, and they stood up like this, but they were being made by the factory as well. And then coming back to the silk, that was in Manchester. I contacted a man called Mr. Graupner, who had a factory, and went there. He said, come when in the evening, come when we close down. It was really spooky. And my late husband, John, came with me. And we went, he just sat and read, which is what he always did. But I was in the middle of the silk, in bales of silk, pulling out some lovely purples and reds and pinks, and they are what I've used in the lettering.
Right. You've almost invented your own font, the Anne Newdigate font.
I did. I wove an alphabet, and I used that as a personal font.
Right.
Yes.
And that, I think, crops up in your digital work as well.
Yes, I found there was a great relationship between DPI and EPI, and this is ends per inch, so that the finer it is, the more detail you can do. The rugs here are something like 10 to the inch or 12 to the inch. That's why they're so fine. And so it's a decision you make before you start. Is, do I want to make it 5 to the inch and it'll go quickly, or do I want to make it fine at about 10 or 12? Most medieval stuff is like 12 or 15 to the inch. That's why it's so fine.
Wow.
I talked about being right up to here in the silk. That was great. That's what you asked me.
Well, I did. I was thinking about this foraging of, newspaper articles and any information that you can put into your work, and sometimes it is quite literally the materials. So your career has spanned, I guess, half a century, and
but it hasn't all been tapestry, because basically, like you said, I draw and I use text and drawing, and I'm doing that a lot now too, because this is hard on the body, this work.
I can imagine.
Your shoulders start to get sore and your back goes and your eyesight goes. In Saskatchewan, had a recipe for cookies that would stop you getting constipated.
We don't have to go any further into this. No. Why did I bring that? Did I bring that up? I hope not. Yeah. Oh dear. Now you've got me really stopped here.
Can I tell you? I wanted to tell you about the time when I was invited to go and went for a year as a visiting fellow to Monash University to establish a tapestry department within their art department, not in the craft department. It was very political. And I was invited out to go and open an exhibition that was down the coast. And the person running the gallery introduced me, and they said, "This is Anne Newdigate. She's a nice lady from Toronto." And that's just about all my beefs, because what did I do? I said, "I'm not from Toronto. I'm not a lady, and I'm not nice." Anyway, sometimes these things pop out. So there's been...
Yeah. So there's all of this evidence of care in your work and care of remembering. I mean, you've written about Kate Waterhouse and a lot of other documented things and written, and the work itself is... while, in this case, the text is horrifying, it is also like a care of remembering something that a lot of us, don't have any real input to.
The term graven in stone, I think, I like to say it's graven in thread, and because this will last, and the newspaper is, I think, cutting is now more valuable than the tapestries, because you can't get any more of those. And I could if I had to make another tapestry.
Really? With all that constipation? Now, probably we should turn it over to somebody with other questions.
Yes.
Size normal for you? You wrote always in the large size?
No, the sentences, the 8 sentences series were all large. I did one for in the whole year that I was teaching in Melbourne, and it was bigger than this because they had a bigger loom than I had access to. My loom I got in Edinburgh when I was there. It was made by the father of a man called Archie Brennan. Get that name, Archie? It's coming back.
Yeah, well, now.
And so I'm limited by the loom. You're always limited by the loom. Or you have to do a composite. I did a very big piece for the city of Ottawa for their new city hall. It was designed by Moshe Safdie, and they had competitions, and that piece I had panels in because it had to go behind the mayor's desk, and it had to also be raised and lowered to show a screen behind. It was a very technical thing. But I'm working at the moment in tapestries that are half the size, and they're very enjoy Coptic work, so they are like Coptic portraits too, and I call them familiars. And you've seen my familiars. Mm-hmm. And that's another ambivalent term, isn't it? Like familiars. A familiar is a good deal and a bad deal too.
Yeah, it is. So if I'm thinking of those pieces, you showed them at the Martin Batchelor Gallery a few years ago.
Yeah.
And they were, even though they were this big, I think some of them looked like they were based on death masks. Am I right about that? Or
yes.
They had this very, they were dark, and they were impossible to stop looking at.
And I did them in a very fine setting so that I could do very fine expressions on the faces too. Yeah. And then they were framed in a slightly bigger thing.
Extremely nuanced. Other questions here? Yes.
I don't think I've ever heard you use the word penance in I'm intrigued by this. As soon as you said that, it actually made sense that it's both the physical labor that's extraordinarily intense, but it's also, it strikes me that your relationship to your life and history in South Africa is constantly being kind of assessed and regretted and trying to understand it. So I would love to hear you say more about this penance, because I can see it's not a flagellation, but it's close to sit at the loom for an extraordinary amount of time. But the other is the question in relation to Lisa's sort of thinking around care, and is this penance a kind of form of care to the history that you represent and participate in?
Well, there's been many angles on the care. I mean, the care of the land, because of the dyes that Kate Waterhouse and Margaret Van Rossum used. Walking in a prairie, you'd see things like lichen and sage and so on. And Kate actually grew stuff. She grew madder, and so there's the care of plants and that aspect. And then the sheep, you could get really fond of sheep. There's somebody on Hornby, she's not there at the moment, but she was living on Downs Point, and she had sheep, and we would be invited over for wine and goodies, and in the trees amongst the sheep. And the sheep would wander around sort of saying, bah, and occasionally they'd do something bad, but it was, again, there's an animal aspect to that too. And then, of course, history and time. And the fact that I haven't been back to South Africa for a long time, but when I was there last time, it was very interesting because the younger generation were sort of mocking me for being concerned about apartheid. Come on, we moved on, you know, and so on. And that's why I think it was good to make a record. And now all the kids that are born since the end of apartheid, they call themselves the born frees. Yeah, and they also really don't want to know too much about the past. They just want to get through their lives.
There's a question. Yes.
This is more a comment than a question, but I'm always intrigued when different kinds of time duration are mixed in a single piece. So that within your work there is that long time spent actually creating something from ideas that are ephemeral.
Yes, and I think it varies a lot and with different people. If you are working in a situation like the Gobelin, and by the way, I only call it Gobelin style because it's not, and they have to do a crest because tapestries were very much used as evidence of status. And so if you were doing a crest or a crown on a bishop or something, you had to work very carefully and very slowly. And this is where I thank the UFS for training me in formalism, because that's what I work with. I don't stop and say, is this going to look like a nose, or is it going to look like this particular Pope's nose, or whatever. So it's very quick for me to work, and I'm much quicker than most people. And the instructors, two really tough women up in Scotland, when I arrived there, it was a big effort to get there, and the first thing they said was, "Have you paid?" So one of the ones always said, people say you must be very patient to do that. And she said, no, you've got to be impatient because you'd never get on with it. So the main problem is to not work at the loom too long, because that's not good for your shoulders and things. So it really varies. The piece I did in Australia, I was teaching at the same time, and that took the whole year, the whole academic year. And I would teach and then work on my studio was with the students. But these ones, I usually set aside 6 months or something for a tapestry. The hardest.
You compare that to something like a newspaper or a photograph.
Right.
In a
Instant.
fraction of a second.
Yes.
Or lasts for only a day. And to take some of that kind of ephemerality and embed it in something that is so solid and long-lasting and not so.
That was a deliberate choice to work in this way, because I wanted to honor those moments, and by doing it slowly and thoughtfully, it comes back to the fact that it was going to be a lasting thing, and the ephemerality.
This is actually more, I think, an observation, but I'm looking at these two pieces, and I can't imagine the others. I can't image them at the moment. But I'm seeing that you have a very powerful cross in this one, and X's in the other. And I'm wondering about those X's.
I use X's a lot, and I think that's another one of those things that people interpret differently. I think that there's been so much that has been negative in my life and experiences that I have done ones where in fact I have one where I painted on a cross, on a tapestry. So I wove the tapestry and then painted the cross, but they are intended to be symbolic, but other people have actually interpreted them as being a different sort of symbol.
About the 5 stars, and do they continue through all the?
That's the Southern Cross,
It is the Southern.
and it is said to somebody born in the Southern Hemisphere that the astrological signs don't apply to us. So I think I'm a Leo because of August, but I'm told I'm not because I was born down out of this. And then I also have I don't know what the term is that's on maps, but you might notice that I have the south up at the top and the north. So I think about mapping and things as well.
Any more last minute questions? I guess
Nicole was going to show us 5 minutes when we had to stop.
Oh, I gave up.
you were showing us 5 minutes. Are we over?
And then she's got one that says end.
Like, shut up. Okay. Okay, well, let's have a break.
Thank you.
No, you.
Ah.